Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Wade Watches. I'm Wade. Welcome to another awesome, amazing, fresh out of the movie theater review. Where today I just got through watching Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, and man, have I been looking forward to this one. I'm really happy that it's finally here and I finally got to see it. I actually didn't see this in IMAX today. I saw it yesterday for the first time in IMAX, and today I saw it again on a standard screen with my dad, who's standing over there. But I will go ahead and give my technical opinion. Definitely go with the IMAX for this one. It looks beautiful in that on that giant screen, and there are a few IMAX sequences that just look gorgeous on some of the biggest screens ever. I would definitely skip standard and just splurge for IMAX. That's my technical review of The Final Reckoning. And now on to my review of the film itself. And as always, I'm going to keep it super spoiler free for you. I'm going to be as vague as possible. No spoilers, no reveals. You're safe as me. You're safe with me, excuse me. Oh my gosh. But anyway, jumping into it, having just seen it for the second time, I'm definitely reminded of how I felt about The Dark Knight Rises. I'm reminded of how I felt about No Time to Die, you know, the end of the Daniel Craig James Bond era. And I'm reminded a little bit of how I felt about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, where you just have, like, you know, funny enough, like almost that impossible task of following up what many, including myself, consider to be just sheer perfection, like just perfect peak action cinema. You know, like it is pretty much an impossible task to follow up on something as like masterful and as amazing as Dark Knight. Like even Christopher Nolan himself, you know, in my opinion, fumbled a little bit. I know opinions are mixed on Rises, but in my opinion, you know, a bit muddled, you know, a bit fuddled. You know, you have that task of following up. Not all the Daniel Craig James Bond films, you know, were great. Quantum of Solace, you know, a little bit. I like it, I think, a little bit more than other people. But Casino Royale, Skyfall, and Spectre, which is also kind of like, you know, but you still have to, you know, you're following up on that, and, you know, you just can't help but measure something like No Time to Die against Skyfall and Casino Royale, because you're hoping that it'll be as good as those peak James Bond films. And lastly, with Indiana Jones, yes, you had Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which again was like man, but you also had you know, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, and The Last Crusade, and you're just hoping that the newest Indiana Jones will be as great as those, which leads me to Mission Impossible. You know, you have Mission Impossible 1, which in my opinion, I know that's the beginning of it. It's good. It's really good. You have Mission Impossible 2, which is also pretty good, but it has a lot of problems. But 3 through 6 are just like sheer perfect peak action cinema, in my opinion. No, scratch that. 3 through 7, I almost forgot about Dead Reckoning, are just like so perfect, so amazing, so iconic, so like riveting, so like pulse pounding. And you're just hoping that the latest installment will just live up to that. You know, can it be as great as Ghost Protocol, as great as Rogue Nation, as great as Fallout, as great as Dead Reckoning, which it's a direct follow-up to? Can it like top that peak? Can it get to that level? And alas, unfortunately, no, it doesn't quite reach that level. And, you know, keeping it very short, I think that's really because I'm going to have to attribute at least a little bit of this to, you know, some of the well-publicized behind-the-scenes drama and shenanigans, where originally this was conceived to be one thing and then they changed their mind and kind of like made it a separate thing. And I definitely kind of feel that here, because it really does feel like there's two separate ideas here, both like kind of competing for supremacy. It's like at one point they feel like we want to make this type of sequel, you know, we want to have it, you know, be big, grand, and epic. And then at another point, it's just like, no, we're just making this, you know, just another standard Mission Impossible outing. And it never really finds its identity. And it makes for kind of, you know, rather like clunky watch, unfortunately. Don't get me wrong, all of those hallmarks of the Mission Impossible franchise are definitely still there. You know, the high sequences and the action sequences and the stunts are still as pulse pounding and adrenaline fueling as ever. And man, there's one scene in this movie that, firstly, that sequence alone is worth the price of an IMAX ticket, and secondly, God damn it, it almost stopped my heart. So you have that going for it, but it's really the story here that let me down a little bit. I was wishing that and hoping that it would be as intense as the two immediate predecessors, Dead Reckoning and Fallout, where I want that story to be intense. I want the stakes to feel as high as ever, because you yourself, that's kind of what you've been teasing in all of the marketing, and I really just didn't feel that here, because the story itself is just feels a bit like kind of like clunky and a little bit disoriented, where, like I said, it feels like they just had two ideas here, like they were going for two separate things that didn't quite gel well. There's constant interruptions where we're reminded of Mission Impossible Past, where I'm like, I get why you have to do that, because maybe not everyone has seen all of the previous installments, but there comes a certain point where you can just tell us, you don't have to keep like interrupting the current film to remind us of previous films. So that kind of bugged me a little bit. And also there's a character in here who I felt like I got it the second time around. I was kind of like, okay, I see what you're doing here. I understand that this is how you want to handle that character, and I'm a little bit more lenient on it the second time around. I got it, I get it, it does make some sense, but I still there's that part of me that's like, that could have been done a little bit better. You could have handled that a little bit better. You could have shown a little bit more respect there. So there's that as well. But nonetheless, this is still a solid installment in this franchise. It's still a good Mission Impossible film, and it's nowhere near as, as mediocre and as problematic as Mission Impossible 2, where it's just like, yeah, you kind of dropped the ball here. You started strong, pretty strong, and now this. So it's nowhere near that bad. So it's not going to be like my least favorite Mission Impossible film, but it's definitely not going to be my all-time favorite Mission Impossible film either. It doesn't really. I'd say I put it maybe in like the top 5, top 4, but it's not like peak like Ghost Protocol or Fallout, which out of all of the Mission Impossible movies, those two are definitely my personal favorites, and in my opinion, the best MI films to date. So it doesn't reach that level, unfortunately, but it's still a good watch. Tom Cruise is still as insane as ever, and he's still out to entertain audiences, and he's still advocating for the true cinematic experience, and that alone is still worth the price of admission, still worth checking this out for. But I can't say like story-wise or plot-wise it's like as memorable as Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, Fallout, or even Dead Reckoning, which feeds directly into this one. So wrapping it up, I'm gonna go ahead and give Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning a solid 8.5 out of 10. Wish I could give it something more. I wish I could bump it up to a 9, but there's just nothing there. It's missing that wow factor that those aforementioned Mission Impossible movies had. It's just missing that zing factor. It's missing even that intensity, save for those individual stunt sequences and action sequences. Those individual sequences where Tom Cruise is being Tom Cruise are tense, are heart-stopping. Like I said, there is one sequence in here that nearly gave me a heart attack, but those are individual sequences. The film as a whole isn't as intense as something like Fallout, unfortunately, and isn't as memorable as something like Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, Fallout, or even Dead Reckoning. So, like I said, it's an 8.5 out of 10. Still worth checking out, still solid, but I'm a little bit let down, not gonna lie, but it's still a solid Mission Impossible movie. And what can I say? It just didn't reach the level of, the best installments of this franchise, which unfortunately is a thing that can happen. But this has been another edition of Wade Watches. If you've seen the final Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, what did you think of it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've seen all the Mission Impossible movies, what's your favorite Mission Impossible movie? Feel free to go ahead and let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you lovely people next time. Namaste.